I stood in the doorway, looking out at the corn. I'd woken up to an empty house and the patter of the rain. I spent the first hour crying, just trying to process it all. Mama was gone. She had left me alone. I was utterly alone in the house. My house now, I suppose. Once my eyes were dry, my throat was raw from sobbing, and I was filled with something I had never really experienced before. I had cried out all my pain, and it had been replaced with anger. This thing had taken everything from me, and now it meant to take the only thing I had left, my life. I pulled myself up from the couch and walked like a wraith through the house. The familiar boards creaked beneath my feet, boards I had known since I was a child. I just stood there in the hallway for what felt like hours, unsure of what to do. I watched the corn sway in the rain, watching for any sign of Greg, watching for any sign of the scarecrows. I was done weeping like a child. I spent that first day making plans. I was trapped here, that much was certain, but that didn't mean I had to give up without a fight. I needed to take stock of what I had, to make a plan. My fear kept trying to resurface, like acid up my throat. I kept pushing it down. I couldn't afford to be scared right now. The second I gave in to that fear, I would be lost. I started in my parents' room. Daddy's rifle sat in the closet, and I hung it across my back by the strap. I found his binoculars on the nightstand, and took them as well, along with a thick green jacket from Daddy's days in the Army. I ran a finger over the patches, wishing he had told me more about that time in the war. He didn't like to talk about it, always got a faraway look when we asked. Mama said he'd had a nervous breakdown when he was in France, became catatonic like he had after Thomas had been taken, and that's why he was here instead of being a name on a monument somewhere. The jacket was a little stiff from disuse, but it felt warm and worn in, just the thing to cut down on the winter chill. I turned, and that's when I saw the picture. It had been Daddy's Christmas present to Mama last year. All us boys were sitting on a bench, dressed in new suits, washed and looking dapper. Even Thomas, who'd just turned 6 the week before, was pressed and clean and smiling. Mama looked resplendent in a new dress, Daddy in his new suit, and the 5 of us made a really nice photo as we sat before a background with a Christmas tree and a roaring fire. Mama had cried over it when she had opened it on Christmas morning, and she had one in the living room and one for the bedroom. As I looked at it, I felt my tears try to well up again. When I heard the scuttling in the living room, I felt the picture drop from my hands. The glass shattered as it hit the floor, but I was already moving for the door. I led with the barrel of the rifle. I walked quietly from the room, hearing the scuttling as it came from the front. It sounded like an animal, its nails scrabbling on the wood as it moved on all fours. I swung wide as I came into the living room, putting my back to the wall as Daddy had always told us. The living room was empty, the sofa, the chairs, Daddy's recliner, and the bookcase sitting dustily in the preternatural silence. It was broken only by the thudding of the rain, the pounding becoming harder than I had ever heard it. How were we not underwater? Surely we must float away at some point, but still the house remained. This whole thing was becoming more and more like one of those pulp novels Mama never let us have in the general store. My hand shook a bit as I came around into the kitchen, setting my back to the front door as I swung in. The kitchen was pristine. Mama had just cleaned it recently, save for the water pouring in through the back door. The door was listing, pushed by the wind and the rain, and the wind was bellowing in through the new breach. I pushed the door closed, securing the deadbolt that usually held it in place, and put my back against it as I sighed out in fear. When the loud thump came from the back bedrooms, I felt that coil of dread wrap around my guts again. I made my feet as quiet as I could, my gun barrel leading as I walked towards the back where our rooms had been. That was where we slept, my parents' rooms being on the opposite end of the farmhouse, and as I walked into that cramped hallway, I could see the door to my brother's room standing open. The long shadow of a crouched someone snaked into the hall, rising on the wall as its grotesque form scrabbled at the floor for something. I steadied myself, watching it paw at something, before rounding the corner and leveling the rifle at the intruder in my house. I found a hunkered Greg, looking every bit like an imp from hell. He was wet, his hair hanging around his face like wet pasta, his skinny pale chest looking sunken. The straps of his overalls were slung behind him, trailing like twin tails, and his pants were muddy and saturated with rainwater. As bad as he looked, his face was the worst part of it. His face looked like a wooden mask that someone had painted badly. He gritted his teeth and hissed at me, his claw-like hands reaching into a hole in the floor. I leveled the rifle at him, not wanting to shoot him, but I wasn't going to let him hurt me either. I don't want to hurt you, Greg. Don't make me, please, I begged, feeling my eyes misting as he turned to glare at me. Greg seemed torn. There was something in the floor hole that he really wanted. He had removed a loose board to get at it, and he seemed to be weighing his options. I repeated my request again, my rifle shaking, and I was worried that I might put too much pressure on the trigger and shoot him by mistake. He took a step forward, and I felt my finger tighten without my command. The gun barked loudly, but Greg was back and hissing, the shaking barrel missing him. He made a grab for whatever was in the hole, but I put the next shot a little closer. The hole between us forced his retreat. His own window crashed as he jumped out of it, and I moved to watch him disappear once more into the swaying sea of green. I turned, meaning to leave, but my foot came down across the hole and I stumbled. I caught myself, but my eyes had seen the hole now. Inside was a child's collection of treasures. Baseball cards, marbles, old candy, bird feathers, animal bones, and a box that now lay on its side. I could guess pretty easily what he had been after in that hole, and I picked it up before leaving the room. I took a chair out of Thomas's room and propped it under the door before going back to the kitchen. I really didn't want him coming in through the window and catching me. The box contained some trinkets, some notes from a girl he'd met at school, and 4 pieces of paper. 2 of them were torn out of my journal, and I wondered when he had had the time to do this. The last one was something I had written just yesterday. Wrote it as Mama had cooked dinner. But the other one talked about Greg and I's meeting in the cornfield as he had built his altar. How had I not noticed these had been torn out? I suppose that the last few days had been a little hectic, but the last had been written while Greg was out in the field. I put it out of my mind for now, turning back to the other 2. The top one must have been written by Mama just last night. As I read it, I felt my eyes well up. She had spilled her heart out in these final letters, and I almost couldn't bring myself to finish it. She had left. She had known that she would, but she tried to make my last few hours with her special. Even under the influence of the green, she had loved me. I pushed the sudden sorrow away before it could take hold on me again, and went to the next note. Daddy's letter to the family. Daddy's letter was enough to dry me up in short order. Daddy talked about the scarecrows, about how they moved through the corn and how they often came to visit him in the night. They had come to his window, they had spoken to him, and I realized that he had experienced the same things I had. Was Greg controlling them somehow? Did he control the corn, the scarecrows, the field even? What chilled me even more was his description of how Thomas had been taken. The ground had simply sucked him up and left a scarecrow in his place. I had been in the field hundreds of times since Thomas was taken, and the field had never swallowed either me or Mama up. It just didn't make... Something moved by the window, and I let the paper drop from my fingers. The darkness had gathered outside, and through the glare of the window, I could see the scarecrows gathering outside the window. They were pressing their sackcloth faces against it, cracks running up the glass as they piled against the pane. I fell sideways out of the chair as it clattered to the floor. I grabbed the rifle and ran for the hallway, hearing the windows crash behind me. The living room windows shattered inward as I slid on my sock feet, scarecrows boiling in as I weighed my options. Couldn't stay here, had to pick a room to run to, but every room in the house had at least one window, except for Thomas's room. I could hear the whispers of the hay-filled legs moving across the floor. They sounded like straw brooms sweeping the hardwood as they came after me, and I ran a little faster as I tried to get to the last room at the end of the hall. Thomas had been given the smallest room. I think it had been a storage room before he was born, and I could see the bright-colored wallpaper from here as I ran. Mama had been keeping the door open and the light on, hoping Thomas would come back, but I suppose that she was with him now, somewhere I was in no hurry to get to. I pushed my back against the door as I threw it shut, not wanting to see the horde of straw men boiling up the hall after me. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the coming assault. My dread was at odds with the colorful posters and wallpaper that graced the walls. My foot jangled one of the toys still sitting on his floor, and the happy clown wobbled on its oblong base. It seemed so surreal to be sitting here menaced by some faceless boogeyman. How many times had I stood in the doorway to this room and listened to Mama read to Thomas and Greg? She would smile at me every now and again, noticing me listening, as I remembered a time when I was small and she'd read me to sleep. I was still leaning, thinking about old times, when I realized how quiet it was in the hallway. No one had rammed the door or even shoved against it. There had been enough scarecrows in the house to easily push through the door, but there hadn't even been a rattle. I pressed my ear to the door, listening for scrapes of straw feet, but there was nothing but the ceaseless fall of the rain. My hands shook as I wrapped it around the doorknob. Just a quick peek. That couldn't hurt anything. I opened the door just a crack and stuck my eye to the separation. At first I thought the hallway was really dark. Then I realized I was eye to eye with the sackcloth face of a scarecrow. I slammed the door, but not before an arm snaked into the gap and tried to pry the door open again. Straw did little to stop the door from closing, but it did continue to wiggle as the closed door held in place. I crawled backwards, watching the arm dance and writhe as the light suddenly went out. I was plunged in darkness, no window there to cast any light, and I fumbled my flashlight from my pocket as I looked for something to brace against the door. As I slid the dresser into place, I heard them batter the door with their flimsy bodies. The nightstand and the bed came next, and I curled my knees up to my chest as I put my back against the furniture. They were thumping and smashing against the door, rattling it slightly as their numbers increased, and I remember the fear being the only thing keeping me awake. I had run too much adrenaline through my body today, experienced too much in the last few hours, and now my body was at odds with my fear. I passed out, quivering against the pile of furniture, not sure if I would ever wake up. Day 2. I awoke to silence in the house. Pushing the furniture aside, I could see the barren hallway, no sign of the night before's attack. The power was still out, and I couldn't muster the courage to go check the box around back. The sun was out, but it might as well have been night. The rain was still falling, thick clouds obscuring the sun, and I felt as though I lived in a state of perpetual dusk. The windows seemed to be the only evidence that I hadn't been dreaming. All the windows in the house had been broken, and the box and its contents were missing. Luckily, I had put my journal in my pocket. After sweeping up the glass, I penned the passage you just read. The writing was like a cleansing, flushing my fears and doubts and galvanizing me in a way that I had never been able to. I had always enjoyed the act of journal writing, the birthing of thoughts and ideas, and the act often soothed my anxiety. That done, I ate a can of beans from the cupboard and set to work. By noon, I had assembled my tools on the kitchen table. 30 rounds for the rifle, a crowbar that Daddy had put under the sink, 6 bottles of moonshine, a lighter from Daddy's dresser, a razor from Mama's sewing kit, 30 or so mason jars from the pantry, the flashlight, binoculars, and some lighter fluid from under the sink. It was a small collection of tools, but it was better than nothing. I spent some time getting everything ready, and then stepped out onto the porch. I stood, watching the rain come down in buckets. The mason jars I had poured the moonshine into sloshed as I raised it to light the makeshift fuse. It had been easy to stuff the rags down into the lids, making a small hole for them, and it would conserve the moonshine some. I didn't know how long I would need to hold out here, but I knew that I would trade all 6 bottles if I could burn that hateful corn seed to the ground. I stared out at the hateful cornfield, the swaying edifice of my despair, and prepared to light the first jar. As the rag burned, the voices I'd been hearing since the rain began changed slightly. It had always been hateful, needling, the voice that told me I was weak and worthless. Its words felt like hornets on my skin, and the scuttling voice had done nothing but drive my anxiety. Now, however, it had turned placating, almost frightened, as it begged me not to do this thing in haste. The corn, it seemed, was important. Let's see if it burned. The jar flew end over end as it careened towards the corn, spouting flames as the moonshine soaked the rag and fell amidst the corn. For a moment, I worried that it wouldn't take. The corn would be too wet, the fuel wouldn't catch, the moonshine wouldn't be pure enough to burn for long. When the stalks began to burn, however, I knew my fears had been unfounded. I grabbed another jar and sent more fuel sailing towards the corn. The voice began to scream as the flames licked the tall stalks. It told me how I had ruined it, how my death would be swift, how there would be no mercy for me now. It told me that I would never find joy in the soil. It told me my family would never accept me now that I had ruined his blessings. I didn't care. I just kept lighting the jars and throwing them into the field. Rain or not, the corn burned. You're only delaying the inevitable, Bradley. I stopped, the flames from the lighter not having kissed the rag yet, and looked at Greg as he stepped out of the corn. He looked different from the goblin I had seen yesterday. His clothes were clean, his hair was slicked up, and he possessed none of the rage I had seen the night before. Quite the contrary, he seemed almost gleeful. Unless you've come to help me burn the corn down, Greg, I don't give a damn what you have to say. You can't burn the corn, Bradley, no more than you could stop Mama from leaving. I turned and gritted my teeth at him, wanting nothing so much as to smash the jar in his face. Why, Greg? Why the hell are you doing this? We're brothers, for Christ's sake. This is as much your home as it is mine. I'm the second son of a second son, Bradley. Once you inherit the farm, what's left for me? I'd end up in the army like Daddy, and return from whatever war comes next with money and a plot of dirt to squander on my own firstborn. You think that because you are first, that you deserve this land, but it's already been given to me by a higher authority. I never felt that way, Greg. There would always be a place here for you. I don't need all of this. We can share it. Just come back and stop acting like this. I don't understand what happened in the woods, but... He cut me off. What happened in the woods? What happened in the woods is that you forsook me. You left me to die at the hands of some shapeless nightmare. But I forgive you. You were worried it had killed me. Well, it did. Your brother died in the woods that night. But it was your cowardice that killed me, not the one who took me. I gritted my teeth, knowing he was right, but not understanding how he could throw everything away because of my lapse in bravery. I said I was sorry. Well, what do you want from me? You would kill our entire family because I got scared and didn't protect you one time? Kill our family? Oh no! I have united them, brought them together in the soil. But you will never know that place. You are the last, because I know that such a thing would be the greatest hell you could ever experience. If I could leave you alive to live with the knowledge that your cowardice has made you an exile from this family, I would. Unfortunately, he says that you must be my sacrifice. You're what? I asked, the flame in the corn already dying as the rain threatened it. Even as the flames licked at it, the corn was already going out. You'll see in time. For now, just enjoy what remains of your pathetic life, Greg said, walking back into the corn. Day 3. I slept poorly last night. I spent the night in Thomas's room, and I was once again attacked. They threw themselves at the door, pushing and slamming at it. I heard the frame groaning against the weight of their numbers, and I shoved against the barrier to keep it at bay. They're limitless, fearless, but they've left with the sun. I came out to find nothing in the hall to let me know that they had been there at all, except the splintered door frame. I tried to sleep during the day, but just as my eyes would slip closed, the scarecrows would start slamming against the door again. This surprised me because I had believed they couldn't move in the daylight. I had believed that the daylight would provide me some safety. As my adrenaline ran heavy in my blood, I learned that I had been wrong. Day 4. I was shaken out of a thin sleep last night by the floor groaning in protest. As I came awake, the floor started to crack and creak, the boards bowing as something pushed at them. The walls, too, were groaning, and the ceiling was sending a powder of dust down onto my head. The agitated scream of wood was everywhere, and as the first board snapped, I saw the source of the intrusion. Corn. It was corn. The corn stalks had grown under the house, through the walls, all over the roof. The corn was coming to get me. The corn was surrounding me, surging, rolling waves of green. I ran from it, trying to get the barrier away from the door. But as the door came open, I was pushed into the growing mass by sheaves of corn that grew straight up the hall. As it enveloped me in an earthy cocoon, I began to scream, clawing at the corn as I tried to escape its compressing walls. I woke up screaming, my hands bloody since I had lashed out at the furniture around me. I've wrapped my hands in strips of my own shirt, but they ache badly. I'm keeping this journal more out of a sense of duty than anything. I think it may be all that's keeping me sane. Day 5. I keep writing, but the words don't even make sense anymore. My life has become a series of waking terror, fueled by adrenaline. I can't trust anything. Not my memories, not my reality, not even this goddamn journal. The words have started jumping off the page and running out the hole in the wall even as I write them. Last night, when I awoke from my corn dream, I saw lights outside the holes in the wall. The holes. I almost forgot about them. I thought I saw the scarecrows trying to break in, so I shot at them. Turns out, I guess they weren't real, 'cause now there are some pretty big bullet holes in the wall where I tried to shoot at the scarecrows. I see them looking through them now, though. They come to peek at me like an animal in the zoo. I don't shoot at them anymore. It just seems to make them come back more often. But I was talking about the lights. There were fires in the corn, not like the ones I had lit. There was rhythmic chanting, strange sounds I could hear garbled through the holes in the wall. I could hear something with 1,000 voices calling him. I couldn't sleep after that. All I could do is lay there and think of the chanting, listen to the voices, tell me that it was already over. I'd burn this house to the ground if I could. I think that today they will get me. I can't possibly stay awake another second. I can hear something heavier than scarecrows coming in the house now. My eyes are closing. I'm losing stretches of time every time I blink awake. It won't be long now. Good evening, my little creeperonies. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. Well, it's finally happened, dear fans. I've run out of patrons, unfortunately. So, if you'd like to help, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you can be one of my Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. Or you can always join my Ghostwriter tier if you are a fellow reader of the spooky. Or just come on back tomorrow night for more great stories. Tomorrow night is part 8, the finale, and you won't want to miss that. So, until next time, Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening and a spooky Halloween.